Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing okay today. Let me check my sound. Guys, if you enjoy what I'm putting down, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. Of course, you can always support through Patreon. I've been getting right many new people, so welcome to the Soapbox. I want to talk about something. And I'm going to try to keep this relatively fast. So if I don't take comments after, that's probably why I have another video I want to get to. And this is one of those videos where I feel I will repeat myself over and over and over again. So I'm going to try to avoid having that effect. The President of the United States has decided to take on somewhat of a racist policy to separate kids from their mamas, essentially ripping away families, ripping apart children from their moms and dads, these ICE agents, throwing the kids in cages like they're animals, and throwing the parents in concentration camps in which they're, in some cases, forced or coerced strongly to work for pennies on the dollar. That's fucking amazing. We don't want you in our country, even though you're coming to our country to work, but we will get you to work in our concentration camps, working for some private prison with pennies on the dollar. Donald Trump, freedom and justice. This image came out with Obama's kids in cages. They thought it was attacking Trump. Some Hillary supporter put it out thinking that this was going to attack Trump. Actually, it was Obama, and Obama's people were scrambling to explain why these kids in cages are somehow different than Donald Trump's kids in cages. I don't want to see kids in cages at all. And if I would have seen these kids in these cages during the time that Obama had them, hopefully, I would have looked at this and said, this is ghastly. You've put children in kennels. That picture, however, does not in any way diffuse any attacks on Donald Trump for ripping kids away from their parents and throwing those parents in concentration camps, private prisons, where the private industry is getting fat off of the immigrants that the Trump administration is now prosecuting and throwing into those camps. Working, being forced to work in some cases. Coerced into labor. I mean, after all, you're somebody in a country, you've been essentially X'd out of society, and you have a capitalist industry that is looking to make a profit off of you, seeing as now that you've just so happened landed into their prisons with no distribution of power at all. The immigrants face retaliation if they don't essentially work in the way that the corporate masters who own that jail wants them to work. This is slave labor plus 8 cents. That's essentially what you have. 8 cents to slave labor. Essentially slave labor minus 8 cents, which is what it boils down to. And I'm using 8 cents because 8 cents is the amount that we were paying our inmates in order to fight fires that Kamala Harris essentially wanted to pay our inmates 8 to 32 cents to fight fires or to do jobs for dirt cheap because the city didn't necessarily want to pay for actual labor. Please tell me that even if you support Trump, this is atrocious. You're literally ripping away parents from their kids. This is atrocious. Take a look at the excuse that Trump's mouthpiece gives here. It's magnificently unsatisfying.
The Attorney General earlier today said that somehow there's a justification for this in the Bible. Where does it say in the Bible that it's moral to take children away from their mothers?
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually
when Michelle Wolf did her bit and went after Sarah Sanders or Huckabee Sanders. This is one of the stupidest answers that I think I've ever heard at a presidential dispatch box. It is purely biblical to enforce the law. Now, we're talking about Jesus, who went from pillar to post, not all that happy about wealth and inequality. Easier for a camel to go through the head of a needle than a rich man to go through heaven. That gives a very certain disposition from the standpoint of the way Jesus views cash and capital. He would not be on the side of the ICE agents, the thick-necked brutes that are ripping mothers away from their kids. If you honestly believe that Jesus Christ will be on your side, you're magnificently mistaken. I would even say you're on something. Let's keep looking. Let's go further into this ridiculousness.
Actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen.
What was a parable where Jesus said he was going to have brunch with some guy? He says, I'll meet you there for brunch, big guy. And the guy goes to his house and he waits on Jesus. And there are multiple people that comes, the poor, the crippled, the crazy. And he turns them all away because he's waiting on Jesus. And he sees Jesus coming out of the McDonald's. And Jesus exclaims to him, I came to you multiple times, but you did not essentially meet me. Essentially, all of those people who came to you in need was me. I am you, you are me. Treat others in the way that you want to be treated. Why do you believe that Jesus, who is essentially talking about the poor, the weak, the huddle masses, focusing on these people, is going to take your policy of taking human children from their mothers and putting them in cages while you prosecute their families in concentration camps? Why do you believe that Jesus in any way will be on your side? This seems absolutely absurd to me, and yet she's saying this with a straight face to a reporter as if this is some defense for ripping mothers from their children. Let's keep going.
It's in the Bible to
That's
follow
not what
the
I
law.
said, and I know it's hard for you to understand, even short sentences, I guess, and please don't take my words out of context, but the separation of illegal alien families is the product of the same legal loopholes that Democrats refuse to close, and these laws are the same that have been on the books for over a decade, and the president is simply enforcing them.
Policy to take children away from their parents. Can
It's
you
a
imagine
moral
the horror
policy
that
to
these children
follow
must
and
be going
enforce the
through
law.
when they come?
Is it now? Is it always moral to enforce the law? Is it always moral to enforce the law? I would say slavery was pretty fucking immoral. I would say some of the laws, they were passed from a standpoint that allowed Native Americans to have their land be stolen, was legal, but grossly immoral, seeing as you were murdering a large number of people. I would say that the framework that you use in order to torture human beings was pretty fucking immoral. And yeah, it might have been within the lines of the law based on the way that they were reading the law. The law is malleable, and then those things can be altered and twisted any way you want them to. The question that he was posing to you, not was it against the law, was it moral? It's a difference in those things. The whole point of him bringing up the Bible verse was to kind of make this point across to you that what you're doing is grossly over the top, without fail, immoral. That seems to have slipped by her. And she's making an argument that it is somehow biblical to enforce a grossly immoral law in which mothers are stripped away from their parents, and that it is somehow biblical to not help the least of us, but to put the least of us in a goddamn prison cell, in a work camp, in a concentration camp, working for pennies on the dollar for some corporation that's getting fat off of the immigrants that Donald Trump is prosecuting. And by the way, what Trump is doing here is not stopping the tide of immigrants from coming to the country. It's not. So, A, it's immoral, and B, it's not even working for the purpose to which they said it's working, unless the purpose of it is just to punish human beings for coming to the country. This is just like in the UK where the Tories had this dumbass policy of universal credit. You find out that universal credit doesn't work at all, and it's pushing more people into poverty. And the Tory government says, well, it's helping people to find work, when you find out, no, it's not. But that's not really the point of it. The point of it is not necessarily to help people to find work. The point of it is to essentially punish people for being poor. In this case, the whole point is to punish people for coming into the country. It has nothing to do with anything else. It is an immoral policy pushed forth by Donald Trump in order to punish immigrants. This is the same person that says Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers, which gets you across this kind of idea of what's in this person's psyche and what's in this person's head when he's going about putting these quote-unquote rapists and drug dealers in prison. Seeing as he says he only thinks a few of them are good people, you would imagine that to Donald Trump, all of these people are somehow bad. They're not, actually. They're just human beings trying to find refuge. And they are not your problem. Take a look at this. Hundreds of children are now being separated from their parents in courts along the border every week, with little to no system in place to reconnect those families as they pass through the criminal justice and immigration systems. With shelters for children separated from their parents rapidly hitting capacity, the Trump administration is actively exploring ways to lock up immigrants in military bases. He's going to put the kids also in concentration camps now, excluding, according to recent McClatchy report, through the use of tent cities. Tent cities. As for the adults caught in the zero tolerance push, Reuters reported last week that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement was beginning to transfer roughly 1,600 detainees to a handful of federal prisons across the countries. I suspect private prisons. So again, you can make pennies on the dollar for their labor. Trump supporters, I understand that you have this thing in your head about immigration. You are looking at the wrong person for your demons. In the same way that the Democrats are using identity in order to kind of kick up a certain amount of dust, Republicans do the same thing. Punching down, always punching down, trying to make you think that the problem in this case is the immigrant. The lowest person on the totem pole is somehow the problem in this situation. Who's hiring those immigrants? And why are they hiring those immigrants? They're hiring those immigrants because from a capitalistic standpoint, if they can get that labor for cheaper, they get that labor for cheaper. Now, you look at this and say, that fucking immigrant coming into the country, as opposed to that fucking capitalist hiring that immigrant for less. I understand that you think the immigrant is the problem here. The immigrant is not the problem here. The amount of immigration that's coming into the country to the United States is like net negative at this point. Yes, you would have people float to the border, but you also have people floating out of the border. The idea that we've decided in this country that freedom and justice and that the borders are being so overrun by something and that our problems end up with whatever's coming to our borders is lunacy. This is just as lunacy as Democrats chasing Russia, thinking that Russia has something to do with the election. They're giving you ghosts. They're giving you red herrings. They're giving you red herrings so they don't want to deal with the actual problems that's affecting the country. And fact is, both parties are co-opted by the same forces. The immigrants are not your problem. And your thing of trying to bash the least of these will get you nowhere. They're giving you red herrings. They're giving you things to focus your attentions on because they don't necessarily want to focus on the actual issue, which is the system itself that has, let's say, it is putting you person versus person in a way where it's unnecessary. The immigrant is not your issue. They didn't make the laws. They're not hiring anybody. If anything, they're fleeing for their lives. In some cases, hellish situations. In other cases, they just want a better life. I would suggest that you point your ire at the people who are hiring them. They don't have to hire them at all. They don't have to pay you what they pay you. They don't have to lower your wages in order to come. They don't have to do any of that stuff. You're pointing at the least of us. The least of us is not the one who's doing the hiring. He's not the one that owns the company. None of that. So, look, I guess my point to this is a red herring. In the same way that Russia is a red herring. The problems that are addressing us can be solved by us, but not if we're focused on this nonsense of Mexicans charging across our border. I mean, come on, this is nonsense. Think about all the problems that avail you. Mexicans don't match into any of them. Immigrants don't factor into any of them. All of these things are internal to us, to the United States. Issues of healthcare. Your life has gotten harder, and part of the reason your life has gotten harder is because the political parties have ferreted money into military, into port, and all this other stuff, as opposed to reinvesting it into the people themselves. We are the richest country on the planet. We spent $80 billion on a whim for the military, but we can't put that money towards education, nor can we put that money towards college. And I would even go further and say not that the private class, the capitalist class, be the determining factor in whether or not people go to work. If you're conservative and you believe people should have the decency or the dignity of work, fine, federal jobs guarantee. Right off the bat. And don't ask if you can afford it, because we can afford it. The amount of money that we put into other companies and everything else, we can afford it. The issue is not if we can afford it. The issue is, do you have the gumption and the nerve to look at these issues in the face and not necessarily follow every white rabbit or red herring that is put up by either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party as they fail miserably to actually get anything accomplished? I'll leave it here. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. Of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.